Every morning Daniel followed the same routine. Coffee, slippers, slow walk down the gravel driveway with Rusty padding beside him. Rusty was 14 now. His golden fur had faded to cream around the muzzle, his hips stiff in the cold. Still, he never missed the mailbox trip. It was their thing, the last remaining ritual after Daniel's wife passed and the house grew too quiet. The air that morning felt ordinary, soft, pale sunlight stretching across the yard. Daniel opened the mailbox and shuffled through bills and flyers. Behind him, Rusty didn't move. "Come on, old man," Daniel murmured gently. But Rusty wasn't looking at him. The dog was circling, slowly, deliberately, around the base of the mailbox post. Once, twice, 3 times. His tail wasn't wagging. His ears were forward. Low whine slipped from his throat, not loud, not frantic. Focused. Daniel frowned. "Rusty." The dog nudged the wooden post, then pawed lightly at the ground, then circled again. Daniel's chest tightened. Rusty had never done this before. Not in 14 years. He knelt down, brushing his hand through the dry grass. Nothing. Just dirt and scattered leaves. Rusty pressed his nose firmly against the back of the mailbox and let out a trembling whimper. And that's when Daniel noticed something taped underneath. A folded piece of paper. But what the dog sensed was far from ordinary. Before we continue, remember to like, share and subscribe for more heart-touching dog stories. And tell me, where are you watching from? Every morning Daniel followed the same path. Kitchen light on. Coffee brewing. The low hum filling the empty house. The house used to wake up in layers. Soft music from the bedroom, cabinet doors opening, a second mug placed beside his. Now there was only one cup on the counter. Rusty waited by the door. He didn't bark anymore. Not at 14. He simply stood there, patient. Tail low, ears relaxed, watching Daniel with those cloudy, loyal eyes. "All right, old man," Daniel murmured, slipping on his jacket. "Let's go." The air outside was cool and pale with early light. The gravel driveway stretched ahead, bordered by tired grass and a wooden fence that leaned slightly at the corners. Frost clung to the edges of the mailbox post. Rusty stepped carefully. His hips were stiff in the mornings, each movement deliberate. But he never missed this walk. Never. The mailbox ritual had started decades ago when Rusty was just a bounding golden blur of fur. Back then, Daniel's wife Claire would stand at the porch waving dramatically as they walked down the driveway, teasing them for taking the scenic route. Daniel could still hear her laugh. He pushed the memory down gently. Not to forget, just to breathe. They reached the mailbox. Rusty sat beside him as always. Daniel opened the small metal door. Bills. Grocery flyer. A postcard addressed to someone who no longer lived there. He sorted through it slowly. Behind him, gravel shifted. Daniel assumed Rusty was adjusting his stance. Then came a soft whine. Not loud. Not sharp. Low. Focused. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. Rusty wasn't sitting anymore. He was standing stiffly near the wooden post, nose lowered, circling. Once. Twice. 3 times. His tail wasn't wagging. His ears were slightly forward. "Rusty." The dog paused, then nudged the base of the mailbox post with his nose. Daniel frowned. "What is it?" Rusty circled again, slower this time. His movements were deliberate, almost careful, as if measuring something invisible in the air. The morning was silent except for distant birds and the faint rustle of leaves across the road. Daniel stepped closer. Rusty placed one paw gently against the dirt near the post. Scratched lightly. Not digging. Just indicating. Daniel's chest tightened. 14 years. Rusty had never done this. Not once. He crouched down slowly, knees cracking. The earth was dry. Cold. Nothing unusual. "It's just dirt, buddy." Rusty exhaled sharply through his nose. Then he shifted to the back of the mailbox and let out another small whimper. Different this time. Quieter. Daniel leaned further around the post. And that's when he saw it. A folded piece of paper. taped carefully underneath the metal box. His pulse ticked upward. Rusty stopped circling. He simply stared at the paper, waiting. Daniel reached up, fingers slightly trembling. The tape peeled away with a soft tearing sound. The paper was folded neatly in half. No name on the outside. He opened it. The handwriting was small, careful. Some things we lose are never really gone. Daniel's breath caught. The world felt suddenly thinner, as if the air itself had shifted. He read the line again. Rusty pressed his shoulder lightly against Daniel's leg, grounding him. Daniel swallowed. Probably just a kid, he muttered quietly. Neighborhood prank. But his voice lacked conviction. The sentence wasn't random. It felt placed. Intentional. Rusty lowered himself slowly into a sit beside the mailbox, but he didn't relax. His ears stayed alert. His gaze fixed down the driveway toward the neighboring houses. Daniel folded the note carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. "Come on," he said gently. Rusty didn't move. "Rusty." The dog looked up at him, then back toward the road. Another small whine. Not fear. Not distress. Something closer to insistence. Daniel hesitated. A breeze passed through the trees, stirring dry leaves along the pavement. Somewhere a screen door closed in the distance. Everything appeared normal, peaceful, ordinary, and yet, Rusty remained still. Daniel crouched beside him, brushing a hand over the old dog's back. He could feel the warmth beneath the fur. The steady heartbeat. "You smell something?" Rusty's nose twitched slightly, but he didn't move away from the mailbox. After a long moment, Daniel stood up again. "All right," he said softly. "We'll check tomorrow." The words surprised even him. "We'll check tomorrow." As if he already knew there would be something to check. Rusty finally rose. Slowly, carefully. He glanced once more at the underside of the mailbox before turning toward the house. They walked back together. The gravel crunched beneath their feet and paws. The sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the yard. From a distance, nothing about the scene looked unusual. Just a man and his aging dog returning home. But Daniel felt it now. A quiet shift. Something small had changed. Inside the house, he placed the mail on the kitchen counter. The note remained in his pocket. He stood there for a long time, staring at the refrigerator door where Claire's old recipe card still hung by a magnet shaped like a sunflower. Rusty lay down near the back door. Not sleeping, just watching. Daniel finally removed the folded paper and smoothed it out on the table. Some things we lose are never really gone. The handwriting wasn't Claire's. But the sentence, it sounded like something she would say. His throat tightened. Outside, a car passed slowly. Rusty lifted his head. Listened. Waited. Then rested his chin back on his paws, but his eyes stayed open. Daniel folded the note again, more carefully this time. He wasn't sure why his hands were shaking. It was just paper. Just ink. Just a sentence. And yet the house no longer felt quite as still. That night, Daniel found himself glancing toward the driveway through the living room window. Once, then twice, as if expecting someone to step into view. Rusty didn't eat his dinner immediately. He kept drifting back to the door, nose working quietly. Daniel noticed. He said nothing. Later, when the house settled into darkness, Daniel lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above him. Rusty slept on the rug nearby. At least he appeared to. But every so often, the old dog's ears would flick toward the front of the house, listening to something Daniel couldn't yet hear. And somewhere beneath the stillness of the night, a question began to form. Why the mailbox? Why now? Daniel closed his eyes. But sleep came slowly. Because deep down, he knew Rusty hadn't circled that post without reason. And whatever the dog had sensed that morning had only just begun. The next morning arrived colder. The sky was pale gray. Thin clouds stretched wide and flat, holding back the sun. The air carried the faint metallic scent of approaching rain. Daniel stood at the kitchen window longer than usual. Rusty was already waiting by the door. Not pacing. Not restless. Just ready. Daniel slipped his boots on slowly. You're determined, huh? Rusty's tail gave one soft thump against the wall. They stepped outside. The gravel felt sharper underfoot. The neighborhood was quiet. Too early for lawnmowers, too early for traffic. A single porch light glowed faintly 2 houses down. Daniel noticed Rusty walking with more purpose than yesterday. Still slow. Still careful. But direct. No wandering. No sniffing at bushes. Straight to the mailbox. They stopped. Daniel watched. Rusty circled once. Then twice. Then stopped at the back of the post. Nose pressed low, breath steady. Daniel's pulse ticked up. You've got to be kidding me. He walked around to the back of the mailbox. There it was. Another folded piece of paper. Taped carefully underneath. The tape had been placed neatly, almost respectfully. No sloppiness. No tearing. Someone had taken their time. Rusty sat down beside him, posture upright. Ears slightly forward. Watching Daniel's hands. Daniel peeled the tape free. His fingers felt colder this morning. He unfolded the paper slowly. The handwriting was the same. Small. Careful. Steady. She still checks the roses in the morning. Daniel's breath left him all at once. The world narrowed. The roses. Claire's roses. He hadn't touched them since she passed. They grew wild along the side of the house now, bending into the fence, thorns catching fallen leaves. She still checks the roses. He whispered the sentence under his breath. Rusty leaned gently into his leg, grounding him again. Daniel swallowed hard and scanned the driveway. Empty. The street beyond still. A curtain shifted faintly in a neighboring window. Or maybe it was just the wind. This isn't funny, he thought. But the message didn't feel like a joke. It felt intimate. He folded the note carefully. Too carefully. Someone's messing around, he said aloud, though no one was there to hear it. Rusty stood. Then he did something new. He turned not toward the house but toward the road. He took 3 slow steps forward. Stopped. Looked back at Daniel. Waiting. Daniel hesitated. You want to walk? Rusty held his gaze. There was no tension in his body. No fear. No aggression. Just quiet insistence. Daniel glanced once more at the mailbox. Then at the houses lining the street. He hadn't spoken much to anyone since Claire passed. The neighbors had tried. Casseroles, sympathy cards, polite offers of help. Eventually the visits faded. Life resumed around him. He and Rusty stayed still. Rusty stepped forward again. Daniel followed. They walked slowly along the sidewalk. The air felt heavier now. A light wind brushed through the trees, carrying the dry scent of autumn leaves. Rusty's nose moved gently side to side. He wasn't pulling. He wasn't urgent. Just aware. They passed 2 houses. At the third, Rusty slowed. The house was smaller than Daniel's. Beige siding. A narrow front porch. The lawn uneven, slightly overgrown. Daniel remembered the family vaguely. A woman. A teenage girl. He hadn't seen them much lately. Rusty paused near the edge of the sidewalk. His ears perked. His body leaned subtly toward the house. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. Rusty. The dog took one careful step toward the front yard. Not crossing onto it. Just closer. Then he stopped. Waited. The curtains in the front window were drawn. No movement. No sound. Daniel felt suddenly foolish standing there. Come on, he said softly. Rusty didn't resist this time. He turned and walked back toward home without circling again. Back at the driveway, he didn't look at the mailbox. Not this time. He walked straight to the porch and lay down. Daniel lingered outside for a moment. The house next door looked the same as it always had. Ordinary. But the sentence echoed in his mind. She still checks the roses in the morning. How would anyone know that Claire used to do that? Every day. Without fail. Even during chemo. Even when walking hurt. Daniel moved toward the side yard. He hadn't walked along the rose fence in weeks. The bushes were tangled now. Leaves brown at the edges. petals long gone. He crouched slowly, ran his fingers along the stems. Thorns caught lightly against his skin. Rusty appeared behind him, silent. The old dog sniffed the base of the bushes, tail low, steady. Then he looked up at Daniel. Daniel exhaled shakily. You miss her too, don't you? Rusty stepped closer and rested his head gently against Daniel's shoulder. Just for a moment, that small weight felt heavier than usual. Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself sitting at the kitchen table again. Both notes laid out in front of him. The handwriting matched perfectly. Same ink, same careful curves. This wasn't random. It wasn't scribbled quickly. Someone had thought about these words. He considered calling the police. But what would he say? Someone is leaving kind messages under my mailbox? Sounded absurd. Still, there was something about Rusty's reaction that unsettled him more than the notes themselves. Rusty wasn't confused. He wasn't startled. He was certain. Certain enough to circle. Certain enough to lead. That evening rain finally came. Soft at first, then steady. Daniel watched it streak down the front window. The mailbox at the end of the driveway blurred into shadow. Rusty lay near the door again, head lifted, listening to the rain. Every so often his ears would twitch, not at thunder, not at cars passing. At something subtler. Daniel felt it too. A sense of waiting. As if the mailbox had become more than metal and wood. As if it were now a message point. A bridge. Between what was lost and something trying to reach him. Night settled slowly. The rain stopped. The streetlights flickered on. Daniel locked the front door, then hesitated. He walked to the window one last time. The mailbox stood still at the end of the driveway. Dark. Quiet. Empty. He told himself there would be no third note. It was coincidence. Neighborhood curiosity. Nothing more. Behind him, Rusty stood up slowly. Walked to the door. Saturday. Watching. Waiting. And Daniel knew. Tomorrow they would walk down there again. Daniel woke before his alarm. The house felt unusually still. For a moment he lay there listening. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the hallway clock, the soft rhythm of Rusty's breathing on the rug. Then Rusty's ears lifted. Just slightly. He didn't bark. He didn't rise. But he was awake. Daniel exhaled slowly. Yeah, he murmured into the quiet room. I know. The air outside was crisp after the rain. The driveway smelled damp, earth and wet gravel and fallen leaves pressed into the ground. A thin mist hovered low across the lawns. Rusty stood at the door before Daniel reached it. Not impatient. Not anxious. Just certain. They stepped outside together. Daniel noticed something immediately. Rusty didn't pause this time. No sniffing the fence. No glancing at the yard. He walked straight down the driveway. Steady. Focused. Daniel's chest tightened. Okay, he said softly, more to himself than the dog. They reached the mailbox. Rusty didn't circle yet. He stood beside it, nose lifted slightly, testing the air. Then he moved around the back. One slow circle. Then another. Then he stopped directly beneath the metal box. He looked up at Daniel. Daniel swallowed. You're kidding. He stepped around the post. There it was. Another folded piece of paper. Taped carefully underneath just like before. The tape was pressed flat and clean. No wrinkles. No haste. Daniel felt something shift in his stomach. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Rusty sat beside him as he reached up to peel the tape free. The old dog's posture was alert but calm. Ears forward, tail resting still against the ground. Daniel unfolded the paper slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable now. Small. Careful. Familiar in a way that unsettled him. He read. She said you'd need time. But she worried you'd forget to open the curtains. Daniel stopped breathing. The world seemed to narrow again. Like the edges had blurred. Open the curtains. Claire used to say that every winter. You'll sink into the dark if you don't let the light in, Dan. He could hear her voice. Clear as morning. Daniel's fingers trembled. Rusty shifted closer, pressing lightly against his knee. Daniel scanned the street. Empty sidewalks. A parked car across the road with dew still clinging to its windshield. No one watching. No movement behind windows. And yet, someone knew. Not just details. Not surface memories. These were inside moments. Private ones. Daniel folded the note carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket with the others. Rusty didn't move. He was watching the street now. His head angled slightly toward the beige house 3 doors down. Daniel followed his gaze. The curtains there were closed. No lights visible. Rusty. The dog stood slowly. Then he did something new. He stepped forward off the driveway onto the sidewalk. He didn't pull. He didn't tug. He simply began walking. Daniel hesitated only a second before following. The air felt cooler against his face. The mist thinned as the sun pushed gently through the clouds. Their footsteps sounded louder than usual. Rusty walked with purpose. Not fast, but steady. They passed one house, then another. When they approached the beige house again, Rusty slowed. His ears lifted. His body leaned subtly toward the yard. Daniel felt his heartbeat begin to thud. "Easy," he murmured. Rusty stepped onto the edge of the grass this time. Just one paw. He stopped there, nose slightly raised. Not sniffing wildly. Not searching the ground. Listening. The house looked quiet. Paint slightly chipped near the porch steps. A wind chime hanging still beside the door. Daniel felt foolish standing there again. But Rusty wasn't foolish. Rusty wasn't guessing. The old dog's posture wasn't tense. It was attentive. Daniel stepped closer to the sidewalk's edge. And that's when he noticed something small. Near the base of the front porch. A ceramic flower pot. Inside it, tucked partially beneath the rim, a folded piece of paper. Daniel's breath caught. He glanced toward the house. No movement. Rusty gave a soft, low whine. Encouraging. Daniel walked up the short path to the porch. Each step felt heavier than the last. He crouched beside the flower pot. The paper was dry, carefully folded, waiting. His fingers hovered over it for a moment. Then he picked it up, unfolded it. The same handwriting. Steady, gentle. I didn't want him to be alone. Daniel stared at the words. The porch felt suddenly smaller, the air thinner. Rusty stepped up beside him and sat. Close. Daniel read the sentence again. I didn't want him to be alone. Not you. Him. His chest tightened. Rusty's breathing was steady beside him. The old dog wasn't confused. He wasn't alarmed. He was guiding. Daniel stood slowly. He looked at the front door. Closed. Silent. He considered knocking. But something held him back. Not fear. Not anger. Just the sense that whoever had written these notes wasn't trying to hurt him. They were trying to reach him. Carefully. Quietly. Rusty stood as well. His tail gave one small gentle sweep against the porch step. Then he turned, not back toward home but sat again. Waiting. Daniel exhaled slowly. Okay, he whispered. He stepped forward and knocked. Once. Soft. The sound echoed faintly inside the house. Rusty's ears tilted forward. They waited. 10 seconds. 20. Footsteps. Light. Hesitant. Daniel felt his pulse rise. The door opened just a few inches. A teenage girl stood behind it. Dark hair pulled back loosely. Oversized sweatshirt. Eyes slightly red around the edges. She looked surprised. And nervous. Rusty didn't bark. He didn't step forward. He simply looked at her. Tail resting low. The girl's eyes shifted to the dog. Her expression changed, softened. You found it, she said quietly. Daniel's throat tightened. Did you write these? She hesitated. Then nodded. A small, almost apologetic movement. Rusty let out a slow breath and lowered himself gently onto the porch. As if the waiting was over. Daniel held the folded note in his hand. The paper trembled slightly. Why? He asked softly. The girl looked down at Rusty. Then back at Daniel. She talked about you, she said. Daniel felt the world tilt. Claire. The girl nodded again. She said, "You'd pretend you were fine." The porch grew quiet. Only the faint creak of wood beneath shifting weight. Rusty rested his chin on his paws. Calm. Certain. Daniel realized something then. Rusty hadn't been circling a mystery. He had been circling a message. A bridge. And now, the bridge had opened. Daniel looked at the girl again. Her hands were trembling slightly against the doorframe. And for the first time in months, he felt something other than grief in his chest. Curiosity. Connection. A small, fragile beginning. Rusty's tail gave one slow thump against the porch floor. As if to say, "Yes, this is it." The porch felt smaller than it had a moment ago. The teenage girl opened the door a little wider. Not fully. Just enough to let morning light spill across the hallway behind her. Daniel noticed the faint scent of laundry detergent drifting out. A television murmured somewhere deeper inside the house. Low-volume morning news. Rusty remained lying near Daniel's feet. Calm. Watching. "You found the others too," the girl said quietly. It wasn't really a question. Daniel nodded. Yes. He studied her more carefully now. She couldn't have been older than 16. Maybe 17. There were shadows beneath her eyes, the kind that come from late nights or too much thinking. "How did you know about the roses?" he asked. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the door. "She told me," the girl said, "when she used to walk Rusty past our fence." Daniel blinked. Rusty's ears twitched at the sound of his name. "She'd stop sometimes," the girl continued. "She'd talk about them, about how they needed trimming, even when she didn't have the strength." Daniel felt a slow wave of memory wash over him. Claire walking Rusty alone. Those last months. He had been at work most mornings back then. Or at appointments. Or just overwhelmed. He hadn't realized she'd been talking to someone. "She liked your dog," the girl added softly. Rusty lifted his head and looked at her. His tail gave one slow, quiet sweep against the porch wood. Daniel's throat tightened. "She never mentioned." He stopped himself. Of course she hadn't. Claire had always been private about her kindness. She gave it away freely. Quietly. "I didn't mean to scare you," the girl said. I see you sometimes. Through the window." Daniel felt his chest stiffen slightly. "I see you walking down there every morning. And I thought." Her voice trailed off. "You thought what?" Daniel asked gently. She hesitated, then looked down at Rusty again. "I thought he was trying to tell you something." A small silence settled between them. Daniel exhaled slowly. Rusty shifted, pushing himself up into a sit. He didn't move toward her. He simply watched. "You were leaving the notes under the mailbox?" Daniel asked. She nodded. "After he started circling it." Daniel frowned slightly. "He didn't start circling until the first note." The girl shook her head gently. "No," she said. "He was already doing it." Daniel felt something catch in his thoughts. "What do you mean?" "For about a week," she said. "Before I wrote anything. I'd see him walk down there with you. And he'd slow down. He'd look back toward this house." Rusty's ears angled slightly forward. Daniel searched his memory. The walks had blurred together lately. One day into the next. Grief had a way of flattening time. "You're saying he noticed you first." The girl nodded again. "He would stop near the sidewalk sometimes. Just stand there." Daniel looked down at Rusty. The old dog's expression was soft, neutral, but attentive. "You were watching us?" The girl flushed slightly. "I wasn't spying," she said quickly. I don't go out much." The words hung there. Daniel noticed the curtains inside her house were still half drawn. "Why not?" he asked more gently now. She hesitated longer this time. "My mom works a lot," she said finally. "Since my dad left. It's just easier to stay inside." Daniel felt the edges of something click quietly into place. Rusty stood slowly. He stepped forward once, then stopped. The girl instinctively stepped back, But Rusty didn't approach further. He simply lowered himself again. Settled. Daniel understood the message. He wasn't pushing. He was offering. Rusty's not much for excitement these days, Daniel said softly. But he's good at sitting. The girl's lips curved faintly. I know. You've met him before? She nodded. Through the fence. Daniel felt a small, unexpected warmth rise in his chest. He'd come over when she was here, she added quietly. Your wife, Claire. Daniel swallowed. She talked about you, the girl said. About how quiet you'd gotten. Daniel blinked. She worried you were shrinking into the house. The words landed gently. Not accusing. Just honest. Rusty shifted again. This time he leaned slightly toward the girl. Close enough for her to reach. She hesitated only a second before lowering her hand. Rusty sniffed her fingers. Slow. Careful. Then he rested his chin lightly against her knuckles. Daniel felt his breath catch. Rusty didn't give that gesture lightly anymore. The girl's shoulders softened. He does that when someone's sad, she whispered. Daniel studied his dog. The posture was relaxed. Intentional. As if Rusty had been waiting for this moment to complete something unfinished. I didn't mean to overstep, the girl said quietly. With the notes. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, he said. You didn't. The morning air shifted slightly. The mist had fully burned off now, leaving soft sunlight pooling across the yard. Daniel realized he didn't feel uneasy anymore. He felt aware. Present. Why the mailbox? He asked. She glanced toward the end of his driveway. Because that's where you stop, she said. It's the only place you pause. Daniel considered that. It was true. He walked mechanically most days. From house to mailbox. From mailbox to house. The only place he truly stood still was at that small metal box. Rusty gave one quiet exhale. Daniel looked at him. You were following her, Daniel said softly to the dog. Rusty's tail tapped once against the porch. Following the instinct. Following the connection Claire had started. Daniel looked back at the girl. What's your name? He asked. Emily. I'm Daniel. I know, she said gently. Of course she did. Rusty stood carefully. He turned toward home. Then paused. Looked back at both of them. Waiting. Daniel felt it. That subtle pull again. Not toward the mailbox now. Not toward mystery. Toward something simpler. Would you? Daniel began slowly. Like to come see the roses? Emily hesitated. Then nodded. Rusty began walking first. Slow. Steady. Down the path. As if he had already decided this was the next step. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't resist the direction. He followed it. The walk back up the driveway felt different. Not heavier. Not lighter. Just shared. Rusty moved between them at an easy pace, his nails clicking softly against the gravel. The sunlight had warmed the morning now. The damp scent from yesterday's rain had faded into something dry and clean. Daniel glanced at Emily once. She kept her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweatshirt, shoulders slightly rounded. But she wasn't looking at the ground anymore. She was looking at Rusty, as if following him felt safer than following Daniel. They reached the side of the house where the rose bushes grew wild against the fence. Daniel slowed. This is what's left of her garden, he said quietly. Emily stepped closer. The bushes were tangled, thorn stems twisting into one another. A few late buds clung stubbornly near the edges, petals pale and fragile. She kept them trimmed, Daniel added. Even when? His voice trailed off. Emily knelt carefully near one of the bushes. She didn't touch it at first. She told me roses don't bloom right if you're afraid to cut them back, Emily said softly. Daniel felt his chest tighten. She said sometimes you have to make space for new growth. Rusty lowered himself onto the grass between them. The old dog let out a slow breath and rested his chin on his paws, eyes half closed, but listening. Daniel stared at the tangled branches. I didn't know she talked to you this much, he admitted. Emily nodded faintly. She talked a lot when she walked him. She reached out now, carefully brushing her fingers along a thornless stem. She'd lean on the fence, Emily continued. Sometimes she'd look tired, but she'd smile anyway. Daniel could see it. Claire, resting her elbows on the fence, laughing lightly, sharing stories with a neighbor he'd barely noticed. She asked about school, Emily said. About my mom. She told me not to rush growing up. Daniel swallowed. And you've been leaving the notes because… Emily looked down. Because she asked me to. The words landed softly. Daniel blinked. What do you mean? Emily inhaled slowly. One afternoon, she said, she told me, if anything ever happened to her, she was worried about you. Daniel felt the air thin again. She said you wouldn't talk about it. That you'd pretend everything was fine. A faint, almost embarrassed smile touched Emily's lips. She said Rusty would know if something was wrong. But you might not listen to him. Daniel let out a quiet breath that trembled more than he expected. Rusty's ear flicked at the sound. She told me, Emily continued, that if I ever felt brave enough, I should remind you of small things. Not big speeches. Just small things. Daniel's eyes burned. She didn't want you to feel alone, Emily said. But she didn't want you pushed either. Rusty shifted, lifting his head. He looked at Daniel. Steady. As if confirming every word. Daniel sank slowly onto the grass. The earth felt cool beneath him. She planned this? He asked quietly. Emily shook her head. Not exactly. She just hoped someone would check in. Daniel stared at the roses again. The wild growth. The neglect. The time that had passed. And when Rusty started circling the mailbox, Emily added, I thought maybe he was telling me it was time. Daniel gave a soft, disbelieving laugh. He circled because of you. Emily tilted her head slightly. I think he circled because of her, she said. A long silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just full. Rusty stood slowly and moved closer to the rose bushes. He sniffed near the base, tail giving one slow, thoughtful sweep. Then he did something simple. He nudged a fallen pruning shear lying half hidden in the grass. Daniel stared at it. He hadn't touched those shears since the week Claire went into the hospital. He hadn't even remembered they were still there. Rusty nudged them again. Gentle. Intentional. Emily looked at Daniel. She used those every Sunday. Daniel's throat tightened. He reached forward and picked them up. The metal felt cool. Familiar. For a moment he just held them. Rusty stepped back slightly, giving space. Not demanding. Just watching. Daniel exhaled slowly. Okay, he murmured. He leaned forward and carefully trimmed one dead branch. The snip sounded louder than expected in the quiet yard. Emily watched. Then she reached toward another branch. Here, she said softly. This one's already dried. Together they worked. Slowly. Carefully. No rush. Rusty remained close, occasionally shifting positions, sometimes resting his chin against Daniel's knee, as if steadying him. After several minutes, the bushes already looked lighter. Not perfect, but breathing again. Daniel leaned back on his heels. She trusted you, he said quietly. Emily's eyes softened. She trusted Rusty, she corrected gently. Rusty's tail thumped once at the sound of his name. Daniel looked at the dog. You've been carrying this around, haven't you? Rusty blinked slowly. Content. Mission unfolding. Daniel felt something loosen inside his chest. Not grief disappearing, but grief moving. Making room. He looked at Emily again. Thank you, he said simply. She nodded. I wasn't sure if you'd be mad. I wasn't sure either, Daniel admitted. That made her smile faintly. The sunlight warmed the side of the house now. A soft breeze moved through the newly trimmed branches. Rusty stood and stretched carefully, his back arching slightly before settling again between them. Daniel realized something then. The notes hadn't been mysterious. They hadn't been haunting. They had been invitations. Carefully timed. Gently placed. And Rusty had known. From the beginning. He had felt the connection before Daniel did. He had circled not because he was confused, but because he was waiting. Waiting for Daniel to look up. To notice. To follow. Daniel ran his hand slowly over Rusty's back. "You did good," he whispered. Rusty leaned into the touch. Emily stood carefully. "I should probably get back," she said. "My mom's working late again tonight." Daniel nodded. "You're welcome here," he said after a moment. "Anytime." She hesitated. "Even without notes?" A faint smile touched Daniel's face. "Especially without notes." Rusty stood as she stepped toward the driveway. He walked beside her halfway, then stopped, watching her go. When she reached the sidewalk, she turned and gave a small wave. Daniel raised his hand in return. Rusty's tail moved slowly, steadily, as if something important had finally been spoken aloud. The driveway felt different now. Not empty. Not heavy. Just open. Daniel looked at the trimmed roses. Then at his dog. "You were right," he said softly. Rusty blinked. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't feel like he was standing alone in the quiet. That evening felt softer than the ones before it. The house no longer echoed the same way. Daniel stood at the kitchen sink, watching the sky dim into streaks of lavender and gray. The roses along the fence caught the last of the light, their trimmed branches casting thinner shadows now. Rusty lay near the back door. Not asleep, just settled. Daniel dried his hands and glanced toward the clock. 7:30. He hesitated only a moment before reaching for his jacket. "Short walk," he said gently. Rusty lifted his head immediately. The old dog rose slowly, joints stiff but determined. His tail gave a quiet sweep against the cabinet as they stepped outside. The air was cooler again. A faint scent of wood smoke drifted from somewhere down the street. Daniel didn't head toward the mailbox this time. He turned left. Toward the beige house. Rusty didn't hesitate. He walked beside Daniel with calm certainty, as if this direction had always been the destination. When they reached the porch, Daniel knocked softly. Rusty sat beside him, waiting. The door opened sooner this time. Emily stood there, hair pulled into a loose bun. She looked surprised but not startled. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," Daniel replied. "I thought maybe you'd like to help me with something." Her eyes flickered past him to Rusty. "What kind of something?" Daniel glanced down at the old dog. "He hasn't had his evening walk through the park in a while," Daniel said. "Claire used to take him." Rusty's ears tilted at the word park. Emily stepped outside slowly, pulling the door closed behind her. "I can ask my mom," she said. Daniel nodded. "Of course." A few minutes later, Emily returned with a light jacket. Her shoulders seemed less tense now. They walked together down the sidewalk. The park was only 3 blocks away, a small stretch of trees, a walking path looping around a shallow pond. The streetlights flickered on as they arrived, casting warm halos over the benches. Rusty slowed as they entered the park. His nose moved gently through the air. Familiar ground. Old memories. Daniel watched him carefully. "Claire used to sit right there," he said, pointing to a bench near the pond. Rusty would just stare at the water. Emily smiled faintly. "He likes reflections," she said. Daniel glanced at her. "She told you that too?" Emily nodded. "She said dogs see things differently." They walked slowly along the path. Rusty stayed between them, occasionally brushing against Emily's leg with his side. Not clinging. Just close. As they reached the pond, Rusty paused. He looked out over the water. The surface reflected the fading sky, ripples bending the light. He took a few careful steps forward, then stopped. Saturday. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Emily lowered herself onto the bench Claire once used. Rusty leaned lightly against her knee. The gesture was so natural it made Daniel's breath catch. "He used to do that with her," Emily whispered. Daniel sat beside them. For a moment no one spoke. The quiet wasn't empty. It was steady. I didn't just leave the notes for you, Emily said after a while. Daniel looked at her. I left them because I missed her too. Her voice wavered slightly, but she kept going. She listened. No one really listens at school. Or at home. My mom's tired all the time. Rusty shifted, resting his head gently on her thigh. Emily's fingers moved automatically into his fur. He'd sit like this while we talked through the fence, she continued. Even before she got sick. Daniel felt the pieces settling more clearly now. Rusty hadn't just sensed grief. He had sensed hers. She'd tell me that losing someone doesn't mean they stop shaping you, Emily said softly. She said grief is just love with nowhere to go. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. That sounded exactly like Claire. Rusty let out a slow breath. His body relaxed fully now, weight leaning into Emily's leg. The old dog wasn't alert anymore. He was content, as if something heavy had finally been set down. Daniel watched them together. The fading light. The steady water. The small hand resting in golden fur. You don't have to stay inside all the time, Daniel said gently. Emily shrugged slightly. It's easier. Maybe, Daniel said. But easier isn't always better. She didn't respond immediately. The wind moved softly through the trees above them. Rusty lifted his head briefly, scanning the park. Then he settled again. Protective. Peaceful. You can come by, Daniel added. Help with the roses. Or just sit. Emily's eyes flickered toward him. You mean that? Yes. The word felt simple. Solid. Rusty's tail thumped once against the bench, as if approving. Emily swallowed. I don't want to be in the way. You're not, Daniel said. A small silence followed. Then Emily spoke again more quietly. Sometimes I thought maybe Rusty was coming to the fence because he knew. Knew what? Daniel asked softly. That I didn't want to be alone either. Daniel felt his throat tighten. Rusty lifted his head slowly and turned it toward Daniel. Those cloudy eyes held something steady. Ancient. Certain. Daniel understood now. Rusty hadn't been circling a mailbox. He had been circling sorrow, looking for where it pooled, and leading them both toward the same place. A place where it could be shared. The streetlights brightened as night settled fully. Daniel stood carefully. Time to head back, he said gently. Rusty rose slower than usual, but his posture was lighter. They walked home together. This time, Emily didn't trail behind. She walked beside Daniel. Rusty moved between them, not guiding now, just accompanying. When they reached her house, she paused at the porch steps. Thank you, she said quietly. For the walk. Daniel nodded. Anytime. Rusty stepped forward and pressed his shoulder lightly against her leg. A goodbye. But not an ending. Emily smiled. I'll bring pruning gloves tomorrow, she said. Daniel watched her go inside. The porch light glowed warmly behind her. Rusty turned toward home without hesitation. The mailbox stood at the end of the driveway. Still. Ordinary. Daniel noticed something. Rusty didn't circle it this time. He walked past it calmly, as if the message there had already been delivered. Inside the house, Daniel left the curtains open. For the first time in months, moonlight filtered softly across the living room floor. Rusty lay down near the window, not watching the door anymore, just resting. Daniel stood quietly for a long moment. The house still carried absence, but it no longer carried silence the same way. Somewhere between the mailbox and the pond, between the roses and the porch, something had shifted. Not erased, not replaced, but steadied. Rusty closed his eyes. And for the first time since Claire had gone, Daniel felt that maybe healing wasn't something you forced. Maybe it was something that circled you gently, until you were ready to follow. The next morning felt different. Not brighter, not louder, just lived in. Daniel opened the curtains before the coffee finished brewing. Light poured across the kitchen floor in long golden strips. Rusty noticed. His tail gave a soft, approving thump against the cabinet. Yeah, Daniel murmured. I remember. Outside, the air carried the crisp scent of early autumn. Leaves scraped gently across the driveway as they walked toward the mailbox. Rusty didn't circle. He walked beside Daniel calmly, posture relaxed. When they reached the metal box, Daniel opened it without hesitation. Empty. No notes. He closed it slowly. Rusty simply waited, then turned toward home. The ritual had shifted. Not ended. Just changed. Later that afternoon, Emily arrived with a small pair of gardening gloves tucked into her jacket pocket. She didn't knock this time. She waved from the driveway. Daniel stepped outside to meet her. Rusty followed, tail moving steadily. They worked in the yard for nearly an hour. Trimming, clearing, pulling away dead branches. The roses slowly began to breathe again. You have to cut deeper than you think, Emily said carefully, examining a stem. Daniel nodded. That's what she always said. Rusty lay nearby, occasionally shifting when one of them moved too far apart. Not restless, just keeping track. At one point, Emily paused and looked toward the fence. She used to stand right there, she said quietly. She'd tell me stories about when you two first moved here. Daniel smiled faintly. She hated this fence, he admitted. Said it blocked the view. Emily smiled back. She said it made good leaning space. They both laughed softly. The sound surprised Daniel. It had been a while since laughter felt natural. Rusty lifted his head at the sound, ears tilting slightly, then relaxed again when he sensed the ease in it. As the weeks passed, a new rhythm formed. Emily would stop by after school. Sometimes they worked on the roses. Sometimes they simply sat on the porch steps while Rusty rested between them. Daniel found himself telling stories he hadn't spoken aloud in months. About Claire's first attempt at baking sourdough. About the time Rusty chased a squirrel straight into the pond. Emily listened carefully, not interrupting, just absorbing. One evening, as golden light stretched across the yard, Emily spoke quietly. I used to think grief meant something was broken. Daniel looked at her. Rusty rested his chin on her shoe. What do you think now? Daniel asked. She considered the question. I think it just means something mattered. The words settled gently. Daniel felt them move through him. Not sharp, not heavy. True. Rusty shifted closer to her leg, pressing lightly. The dog's body language had changed over the weeks. He no longer hovered near the door. No longer listened for something unseen. He stayed near them instead. Present. Grounded. As if the tension he'd been carrying had softened. One afternoon, Emily brought a small photo frame. Inside it was a printed picture of Claire and Rusty at the park. Daniel stared at it in quiet surprise. Where did you get this? She sent it to my mom once, Emily explained. I asked if I could print it. Daniel traced the edge of the frame with his thumb. Claire's smile in the photo was wide. Rusty's younger face leaned against her shoulder. They placed the frame on the kitchen shelf near the window. Not as a shrine, just as a presence. Rusty walked over to it once, sniffed lightly, then lay down beneath it. Content. The mailbox no longer held mystery. It held routine again. But sometimes Daniel would pause there anyway. Not searching, just remembering. And sometimes Emily joined him for that short walk. They would stand together at the end of the driveway. Quiet. The world moving normally around them. Cars passing. Neighbors mowing lawns. Life unfolding. It no longer felt like Daniel was watching from behind glass. He was inside it again. Rusty's pace slowed more noticeably as the weeks went on. His walks shortened. His naps lengthened. But his eyes stayed bright when Emily arrived. His tail still thumped softly when Daniel opened the curtains each morning. One evening at the park, Rusty stopped earlier than usual. He didn't sit. He simply stood still, looking out over the water. Daniel crouched beside him. You okay, buddy? Rusty blinked slowly. Emily knelt on the other side. He's just tired, she said gently. Rusty leaned lightly into both of them, sandwiched between steady hands. Daniel felt a quiet understanding settle in his chest. Time was moving. But it didn't feel frightening anymore, because the space Rusty had once circled was no longer empty. On the walk home, Emily spoke softly. I think he knew. Knew what? Daniel asked. That we both needed someone. Daniel looked down at the old dog. Rusty's steps were slow, measured, but peaceful. I think you're right, Daniel said. They reached the driveway as twilight settled in. The roses along the fence had begun to show new buds. Small, determined. Emily paused at the edge of the yard. I'll come by tomorrow, she said. Daniel nodded. We'll be here. Rusty lifted his head and gave one gentle tail sweep, as if confirming it. That night, Daniel sat in the living room with the curtains open. The photo of Claire rested on the shelf. Rusty lay at his feet. The house no longer felt hollow. It felt shared, not just with memory, but with motion, with voices, with healing that didn't erase the past, only carried it forward. Rusty sighed softly in his sleep, a contented sound. Daniel reached down and rested a hand on his back. You did good, he whispered again. And in the quiet glow of the living room, healing didn't feel distant anymore. Felt like something already here. Winter arrived quietly. Not with a storm, not with drama, just a slow thinning of the light. The mornings grew colder. The driveway frosted over in silver sheets. Daniel's breath lingered in the air as he stepped outside each day. Rusty moved slower now, carefully, each step placed with thought, but he still waited at the door. Every morning, Daniel no longer needed the mailbox as an excuse to step outside. The walk itself had become enough. Sometimes Emily joined them. Sometimes she waved from her porch. Sometimes she carried a thermos and walked beside Daniel, talking about school or books or things Claire once loved. The roses had gone dormant, trimmed back, protected, waiting for spring. Rusty seemed to understand seasons. He lingered longer in patches of sunlight, rested more often near the window, watched the yard with steady eyes. One afternoon, as pale light filtered through the living room, Rusty didn't get up when Daniel reached for his leash. He lifted his head, but his body stayed still. Daniel crouched beside him. Too tired today? Rusty blinked slowly. Not distressed, not uncomfortable, just weary. Emily had arrived earlier that day with homework in her bag. She noticed immediately. He didn't eat much this morning, she said gently. Daniel nodded. I know. They didn't rush. They didn't panic. They simply sat with him. Rusty shifted his head until it rested lightly against Daniel's knee. His breathing was steady, soft. The house felt quiet again, but not the old kind of quiet. This one was full. Full of shared glances. Full of understanding. Daniel ran his hand slowly along Rusty's back. The golden fur had thinned around his hips. The white around his muzzle had spread. You've carried a lot, Daniel murmured. Rusty's tail gave one faint tap. Emily moved closer, sitting cross-legged on the floor. She rested her hand near Rusty's shoulder. He looks peaceful, she whispered. He did. That evening they didn't close the curtains. They let the sky darken naturally. Moonlight pooled across the rug. Rusty's breathing slowed. Not uneven. Not strained. Just gentle. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not fear. Not resistance. Quiet acceptance. He leaned closer. Thank you, he whispered. Rusty's ear flicked faintly at the sound of his voice. Emily swallowed softly. He did what she asked, she said. Daniel nodded. He did more than that. Rusty had circled sorrow, followed instinct, bridged silence. He had known before either of them did that loneliness doesn't disappear on its own. It needs direction. It needs nudging. It needs a patient heart. Late into the night, Rusty's breathing grew lighter. Daniel stayed beside him. So did Emily. No one rushed the moment. No one filled the space with noise. Rusty shifted once more, pressing his nose gently against Daniel's hand. The smallest gesture. Then he exhaled. Long, soft, and rested. The house didn't echo. It didn't collapse into silence. It simply held the stillness with care. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Emily reached for his hand, and for the first time since Claire had gone, Daniel didn't feel alone in loss. The next morning, frost shimmered across the driveway. The mailbox stood at the end as it always had. Ordinary. Steady. Daniel walked down to it slowly. Alone this time. He opened it. Inside was a single envelope. No tape. No secrecy. Just resting there. He recognized the careful handwriting immediately. Emily. He opened it. He finished what she started. Daniel felt warmth spread gently through his chest. He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. Then he stood there for a long moment. The wind moved lightly across the street. A curtain shifted somewhere nearby. Life continued. Back at the house, Emily was kneeling near the roses. She had already cleared away fallen leaves. "We'll trim them again in spring," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Yes, we will." Rusty wasn't by the door anymore, but the space didn't feel empty. Felt earned. In the weeks that followed, Daniel kept walking. Sometimes alone. Sometimes beside Emily. The park bench still caught the afternoon light. The pond still reflected the sky. The mailbox still marked the end of the driveway. But the circling had stopped. Because the message had been delivered. Because the bridge had been built. One evening, as winter softened toward the first hints of spring, small green shoots appeared at the base of the rose bushes. Emily noticed first. "They're coming back," she said, smiling. Daniel looked at the new growth. Tender. Persistent. He felt it again, that quiet understanding. Grief had not vanished. It had changed shape. It had made room. He glanced toward the house. Toward the window where Rusty used to rest in sunlight. "You were right," Daniel murmured softly. The wind moved gently through the yard. And for just a moment, it felt like a familiar presence circling something unseen. Not searching. Not waiting. Just steady. The bond between a dog and his human doesn't end with breath. It lingers. In routines. In open curtains. In trimmed roses. In the courage to knock on a neighbor's door. Rusty had not circled a mailbox. He had circled hope. And hope once found doesn't need circling anymore.